Hello, everybody. Welcome to Skorch the Fears, episode 31. I cannot believe we have this. I've done this many episodes already. It is the amazing Elena Tang. Elena, how are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. How are you doing, Jonah?
I'm doing good. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. You're an amazing human being. I'm
Thank
going to
you.
turn on the Instagram live too. I forgot about that. Hold on a second. Let's do that real quick. And then, how have you been? What's life been so far?
It's been amazing.
Exciting.
Been amazing. Yeah. We just got back from the mastermind, so I'm wearing the mastermind shirt.
Oh, how was that? I know you can't reveal everything, but
yeah. It was the best part about it was bringing Kirk, my husband. And he's been on fire since then. So
love it.
He's just really enjoyed connecting.
Before.
No, you're good.
Okay. So because I'm gonna put in your husband, was it the first time he had ever been to anything mastermindy?
Yeah. I mean, really think
was that your first mastermind?
No, second one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Hold on. Okay. Sorry.
You're good.
You weren't at mine, were you?
No. I was at the March one. I think you went. Was it December or August?
Yeah, December.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's get into you now. Now that I'm completely focused on you. So, tell me, how did you get into real estate? What's your origin story?
It's been an amazing ride. So I think I'll start with sort of my why, because it kind of leads into that. But I grew up in a very fiscally conservative family home. My father came to the States as a refugee, and so he raised me with the mentality of don't take risks with your money. And so
wait, fiscally conservative as in you're not talking about politically fiscally conservative. You mean just save your money?
Oh yeah. It's just I kind of call it the immigrant mentality of don't spend your money, even on luxuries or enjoyment. It was always just squeeze every penny, save every penny. And so being that we live in the Bay Area, right? I live in San Jose, grew up in Oakland, and it was something that was presented to my father as an opportunity from his relatives, and he never got into it. So I got married 5 years ago to Kirk, and Kirk is an architect and a contractor. And so, early on in our marriage, he's like, let's invest in real estate. And I was like, nope, I didn't want to do it. I was super closed off because of the mindset that my father...
Because of your dad.
Right. And I mean, again, I don't blame him. I don't have to take care of them financially. They still live in Piedmont. And so I'm grateful for that. And they are financially stable. I'm financially stable. But
you know what? I got to do something real quick. I have to introduce you first.
Okay.
So this is Elena Tang. She's a real estate investor. She's part of Sub 2. She runs the mastermind or the mindset Zooms in our group. She is mainly a buyer, not as much of a wholesaler like me. She mainly buys and holds, right?
Yeah.
And doing a little bit of fix and flipping, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So first off, I just wanted to start with that so people know who you are a little bit. And so, sorry, keep going. So origin story, your husband invests in real estate.
Yeah. And so early on, he just said, let's invest in real estate. And I said, no. And so for 4.5 years of our marriage, it was a lot of back and forth. I just didn't want to do it, was too scared, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a kind of a series of events. So my father was diagnosed with cancer 4 years ago. He's okay now. Thank you. Yeah, he's okay now. But Kirk, my husband's oldest sister, passed away of cancer last year, and she was only 52. And the third issue, or the third event, life event, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for us, was we met with a financial advisor. He calculated, all of our finances and basically said, projected, like, you're going to retire at age 67. You're only going to have this much in your Social Security, and I was just like,
Oof.
like, I mean,
The worst. Retire
right.
at
Yeah.
67.
Yeah. And it's like, especially in light of, just the health scares in our families, I'm like, fuck that. Like, I am not sorry. I just don't, like, if we're not promised tomorrow, like, why am I going to ride this safe, whatever type of lifestyle? And I've got 2 kids. That's not the example that I want. I don't want to perpetuate this like fear mentality. Right. So
Right.
I just jumped into real estate. I had signed up for a real estate mentoring program because I like to follow those that have done it better than I know. And I just, yeah, I wanted to like utilize the time of people by paying them versus like, we have friends that are investors, but it's like, how much time could you really utilize of their time that they're willing to give you? I mean, that's like kind of a little bit of a limiting mindset belief as well, but I
Wait,
just
so there's
didn't.
a little bit of a bridge that I'm just thinking about that you
Yeah.
haven't.
Yeah.
So you went from, oh, God dang it, I don't want to do, I'm going to retire at 67 and screw that.
Right.
I want to retire earlier.
Right.
And with more money, probably.
For sure.
But then you said you were scared of real estate investing. So like,
Yeah.
what made you go in that direction? You have a financial advisor, and then what happened?
So with the financial advisor, he's like, let's put your money into blah, blah, blah yielding stocks. Right. And then obviously with the market going the way that it is now, it's like, what makes most sense in terms of the ability that we have in our control, like just as investors in general? It's like, there's stocks, there's Bitcoin, there's real estate, there's like a slew of different type of investing strategies and avenues. And being that Kirk is an architect and a contractor, I was like, this makes most sense.
Right.
It's within his wheelhouse. And so a lot of that was like, we always talk about who, not how in sub 2. And it's like, Kirk is a huge who, not how for me. But I just didn't like kind of trust it as much. But it was like, from there, it was like, let's just take the plunge and try out real estate investing. For me, that was like kind of a little bit of, I don't exactly know how the social media algorithms like discovered that I was open to real estate investing, but I was getting hit with like ads. I don't know how, but it was just
You
like,
must have Googled something like, how do I get rich?
get rich quick. Yeah. Pace's ads kept on coming up, and I just was like, I felt like his ads were tailoring towards the young wholesalers.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know if you remember any of his ads, but he's got like a skateboarding ad where like someone eats it at like the skate park, and he's like, "Are you tired of eating shit in your real estate business?" I'm like that's not me, right? So it didn't like vibe with me, but it's still like it kept coming up. And I had joined. I mean, I'm not going to talk about the other real estate mentoring program, but I kind of click on a rabbit hole of videos that had to do with Pace. I saw one video that Pace did of like, the long whiteboard where he's talking about creative finance. And the hook that got me was, he said, creative finance is the best avenue to be able to help people. And with my background as a social worker and as a therapist, I was like, this is exactly who I want to learn from. Because for me, my assumption of real estate investing was, like, you're just here to steal people's homes.
Make money.
Yeah. And especially because we live in California, like, it's like, why would people want to sell off market,
Right.
And like, it just, being that the market is the way that it is and equity growth and whatnot, like, so I just had a lot of limiting beliefs regarding real estate investing.
Right. I gotcha.
Yeah.
No, and it makes sense. And then so going a little bit back to the limiting belief of that your dad gave you about real estate investing, and how real estate investing wasn't, like, you were scared to invest in real estate because you're supposed to save your money the traditional way, which I'm assuming is like stocks or whatever he taught you.
Right.
How did you get over that? Was it fully just the fact that you with your financial advisor, you were like, this can't work, we have to change something?
Yeah.
And if so, what do you what do you think that is? Like because I have a theory on what motivates people, but what do you think getting more into it? Like, was it just the fear of this isn't working, or what do you think specifically was going through your mind? That makes sense.
I think a little bit, I mean, it's gonna sound like a little bit of a YOLO, light bulb moment where you're just
Right.
like I would rather try at something in hopes that I'll succeed than die regretting never have tried,
Love it.
right? So like
Truly love it.
and a lot of what I talk about, in my mindset zooms and what I love helping people with is just like I would hate for anyone to die of the regret of never fully thriving at their highest potential.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I feel like everyone has superpowers. Some are more aware of what they have and what they are, and others are still figuring it out, right? And I love being part of people's process to support them to uncover those things and to really truly live in them. So,
I love
I
it.
mean, I would love for you to have one of our sub two brothers, Brian Smith, on if you're, if you're, it sounds like you're obviously going to continue and stuff like that, but he's someone where like he had a lot of limiting fears, and it was just like it took, I felt like a couple of conversations and one pretty pivotal conversation with Brian, and he's just like soaring. He's like going to help as many people get their first deals. And so again, it's just one of those things where it's like, I think that
Where
sometimes
did you have that conversation with him in the mindset Zooms?
it was no, it was a one-on-one conversation with him.
So tell me what you're doing in these mindset Zooms. Like, what are you doing? Because you're a social worker, you're a
Right.
therapist.
Right.
So I didn't know that actually. I didn't know
Oh,
that
okay.
your background was social work and therapy. So you
Yeah.
actually know this better than almost anyone I've probably interviewed so far,
Well,
which is
maybe.
what's happening.
Uh-oh. I think you're Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me
Okay.
now?
Yeah, yep.
Okay. I accidentally was backing it up. So what
Mhm.
I was asking is if you're a therapist, how does one get over fear just in general, let alone just getting into something? Like you must have had clients that were just afraid of anything. Like how do you get over fear?
Yeah, so I guess I want to kind of like clarify a disclaimer is that I in my current profession I'm not a therapist per se. I'm sort of like a brief intervention like resource specialist, if you will. I work at Kaiser. I'm a medical social worker in the pediatric clinic in San Jose, and so I think that's a pretty loaded question because for me, especially when I do work with people, it, to me it's like I don't. It's hard to kind of paint this general answer to that.
Mhm.
I think it really I contextualize everything. So it's always like, if I have a client that's like, how could I overcome my fears? I get a lot of people like, I have a lot of fears. I'm like, okay, let's break it down. Right. So
Okay.
a lot of the times that's really what's needed is I think that people they have fears. Right. And I'm going to use kind of like the boogeyman example because I have young kids. And so it's like, little kids have like, fears. And they're like, oh, the boogeyman. It's like once you kind of shine light into the fear, it's like
Mhm.
the fear becomes smaller.
Right.
And I
What does that
think
mean?
meaning like so um I'm trying to think of an example. I mean, can you name an example of like maybe a fear or maybe like someone that you've like
One of my fears used to be that I this is what I like I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm
no, yeah.
100% agree with you. For instance, one for me was I had the fear of not spending money. I had been learned when I was
Oh,
young
right.
was that you should save your money. Very similar to
Right.
you. You shouldn't
Right.
spend your money too much. You should be really cautious with it, save for a rainy day.
Right.
And then I got over it by recognizing it, by seeing it,
Yep.
and by doing what am I thinking? recognizing it, and then by that, starting to realize it wasn't serving me anymore
Right.
in the way it used to.
Right.
That's just one way, but I keep hearing different answers, so I was curious.
So I think to highlight that though, right? I think one key thing that you did was that you acknowledged it. And I
Right,
always say that like, it's the whole like cheesy GI Joe saying like knowing is half the battle, right? So
right,
it's like I think a lot of times what people do in regards to I think the incorrect way of dealing with your fears is they ignore it, right? They
right,
they they run the opposite way thinking that somehow like time they're going to outgrow their fears or like somehow it's just going to go away. And it's like that doesn't logically make sense. Um and I've heard a lot of people say that about stuff of just like, "Oh, I just thought time would make it go away." I'm like, "Well, I mean, if you want to talk about that, like tell me how that makes sense to you." And there's nothing that they could explain that could say that time in and of itself would just make fear go away. So, like you said, right, for you, it was like you acknowledged your fear of spending money. And then I'm sure that you just explored, like, okay, well, if I do spend money, it's like you kind of walk through the scenarios. Like, what's a bad thing that might happen if you spend money? And what's a good thing that could, right? But it's the problem with fears is that we're always looking at it from worst case scenario and we're not exploring best case scenario,
right,
right? So I just think it's very interesting that when people have fears it's like, oh no, I just don't want to talk about it. And so when people actually book with me, I have a requirement. I'm like, I have it in a Calendly link. Like, you have to be willing to do the work and be honest with yourself and with me, right? You
mhm,
have to be willing to take action. Like, I literally tell people, like, you better have a pen and paper ready to write some notes and to apply whatever we're going to discuss. And I give them homework. Um, but yeah, I feel like like when we actually break the fears down, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to stop that feedback loop that just it's the narrative in your head,
right.
right? Yeah,
So I want you to do an example. Don't say the name of the person, but think of an
sure.
example recently where you did that, where this happened.
Yeah.
And you don't have to do it in your practice. You can do it because I know. Explain first, actually. So, what exactly are you doing in sub two with the mindset stuff? Because
So
honestly, I don't know. I
yeah,
barely
yeah,
pay attention to anything anymore. I
that's
go on the
okay.
Q and A's, and that's about it.
Yeah, yeah, and it's good. I mean, you're focused and, so what I do with the mindset Zooms every Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, or it's I guess I'm gonna call it Arizona time because Arizona doesn't change. And
No, it's Pacific time.
um
We're in.
and
You and me are on the Pacific.
right, currently it's Arizona's Pacific time and then it changes
Yeah.
or whatever. But anyway, so it's every Saturday at 9 a.m. Arizona time. And so I lead them the first Saturday of every month. I try to, and then I've basically opened it up to other people in the community that want to share their kind of experience with how they develop their own mindset, what they want to. I don't really have like a specific criteria, but the idea is just to talk about mindset and to
Mm,
talk, and really the idea behind it. So I have a background with my kind of social work therapy background. I've led like group therapy. I've led groups. I've, kind of helped and managed groups in nonprofits. And the beauty behind kind of, I call it group therapy, if you will. So the beauty behind group therapy is some people, like people are at various levels and stages of their own self-awareness, which I think is, I keep talking about, like, in order to understand how mindset works, you just need to understand first how your mind works, like, period. And again, a lot of people don't know and they're not willing to be introspective of like trying to learn how their mind works. They just kind of go on autopilot thinking that they can just like, white knuckle everything. And I just don't think that that's how life works. And so with the mindset stuff, it's just like, it's just teaching people to be aware of what are your own mindset struggles. And so typically like the first half of the mindset Zoom is to talk about like whatever the leader wants to talk about, like whether it's their own story or whether it's Tom Swan was on last Saturday and he shared about how like he was a really competitive swimmer in high school, and then like he had some type of like brain bacterial infection where he lost all of his mobility. Like he literally had to relearn how to talk, walk, use his everything, right? And so he shared about his experience of like starting over at 17 to learn all of his functions, gross and motor and fine motor skills. And then it's like for him, he shared about his mentality of like, I just knew that I was going to beat whatever this was, right? I was going to just overcome, right? And so everyone shares, they could share their own experience. They could talk about like, I specifically like to talk about like specific topics related to mindset stuff. And then at the latter half of the mindset Zoom, people will just raise their hand and share what their mindset struggles are. And then we kind of step in to really help them overcome their mindset issues, stuff like that. But I think on average, I would say on average about 100 people attend every Saturday, which is a decent number.
That's a lot of people.
It's a good number. Yeah. And I think it's encouraging hearing people just share that they appreciate the platform, right? It's like they talk about like, oh, it's family time. It's more, vulnerable, intimate time to get to know one another and to help one another too. And just really kind of see like if someone's really struggling, I'm like, hey, put your number out. Like, and everyone like text that person to like show love to that person, encourage that person, and people have built like strong support systems and friendships out of that too. So, yeah, that's what I do for the mindset Zooms. And then I've been doing one-on-ones in the community since probably like last year as well. And I've put a hold on that just to kind of get liability insurance to protect myself. But yeah, that's mainly it is it's just providing.
You put a hold on it because of liability insurance, because you're like not a professional therapist, or like you can't give professional advice.
Yeah, I long story short, I'm just needing to protect myself to make sure that like no one's going to try to sue me. I am growing we'll talk about this later, but I'm growing a like kick-ass big portfolio. So I just need to protect everything, right? And it's like I just need to be careful because while I am licensed as a social worker and I'm getting my coaching certification, I just need to make sure to protect, my family, my assets and stuff like that. So
I get it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that for a second. Like what's happening in your business? What are you trying to achieve right now? What have you done and what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah, so we basically got a cash out refi on our primary residence in the South Bay, and we invested it. We bought one home cash, and then we bought subsequently like 6 homes after that. So since from February up until June, we bought 7 homes.
Nice.
It's crazy. It's amazing. Just the velocity of what you could achieve in sub 2 is really powerful.
So how'd you do it?
So, I mean, it's really hard to really kind of like quantify, to be honest. Like I haven't KPI'd this at all. But really, I think it's me providing value to the sub 2 community. I think that I've built like a decent reputation of just being a go-giver, a support to the system. I think pace drop, you know how it is, right? Like, and you experience this too, like being on his podcast, like
not as much as you.
But still, I mean, but you're young and you're doing this, right? And then like the fact that you were recognized by Pace, right? I think that Pace has obviously, the ability to be able to elevate people's anything, right? Like life. So the fact that I feel like every time Pace mentions my name, I texted him one time and I said, I feel like I need to pay you like royalty fees every time you drop my name, because it's like free advertising, right? It's like he mentions my name, people are like, who is that? Oh, and then immediately it's like, I've got private money lenders. I've got people sending me deals because they're like, hey, Pace mentioned your name. I see what you're doing in the community. And that's literally my lead gen. I've never called a seller. I've never, you know what I mean? It's like that in and of itself.
From other wholesalers, basically, but it's just up to by being a go-giver.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I trust the community. So in that sense, like, I mean, I appreciate that they've, been able to recognize the value that I provide and that they want to send me deals. Like they could send it to anyone. They could send it to Pace all day. Right. But it's like, I'm another buyer as well. And so I'm not fearful of like, just diving in and buying as many creative deals as possible.
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
So, okay, how does one become a go-giver? Just in general, not necessarily for sub 2, but just like what does that even mean? And how does one become it? And why
That's a
should one
really
become
good question. Yeah. I think it takes practice. Some people have
it? What is
fears.
it first?
I'm sorry.
What is it first?
What is
Explain
like the first step?
no, what is being a go-giver?
Oh,
Like I know what
being a okay.
I
Okay.
don't
Oh,
know
that's a
that.
good question. Yeah. No, that's fair. I think being a go-giver is really, I think, having the attitude and the posture of like just giving and giving more than you're taking.
Okay.
There's always like, there's the not I don't want to call it opposing, but it's like the go-getter, right? The
Yeah.
go-getter tends to look at themselves first and more pervasively. And so like they're like every time they're always like, okay, how am I going to get mine? How am I going to get mine? And so for me, when I entered into sub 2 in October, I didn't have a lot of real estate investing experience. And so when I dove right in, one of my first and persistent posts was like, "Hey, I'm a social worker. I'm going to help you." And I don't know. I don't know if you even looked at any of the Kajabi like sub 2 educational content, but I think it was like sub 2 like module 0 when Pace talks about like giving more than you're taking. And then the other thing that I think it was like he did a Zoom Q&A back in, I want to say like November, and he talks about Robert G. Allen and how Robert G. Allen, his real estate hero, talks about how 99.9% of the time when people fail in real estate, it's not because of a lack of knowledge, it's a mindset issue. And so for me, it was like, that's where I want to give. Right. And I literally, it was like, I'm going to double down and just focusing on this, just giving on and supporting people with their mindset. And so I think part of being a go-giver is just being confident in that you do have value to provide. I think a lot of times people struggle with like, I don't know what to give. And it's like, you don't need to give so that everyone thinks that the value that you're providing is it's going to serve them. It's like, I mean, again, like I told you, right? On average, about 100 people attend my mindset Zooms every Saturday, but sub 2 has over 4,000. Like, I don't even know the numbers at this point. It's like 4,300, right? It's really high. Yeah. And so when you look at that statistically, I'm like, my goal wasn't to necessarily think that I'm going to reach all 4,300, whatever, people. I just knew, okay, this is a need and I'm going to provide it. Right. And so it's just like, and I kid you not, like my first Zoom, it was Kirk, Carolyn Briley, and another student. That's it. Like 3 people. And I was like, I'm an idiot. I literally thought that. I was like, is this valuable? Like, will people find it helpful? And so it was a mindset thing that I knew I just had to push through, because it was like, it actually literally happened when Jamil was doing one of his like secret agent challenges, like back in last fall. Yeah. And it started that Monday, and I was doing a Zoom that Monday, and there's only 3 people. And then the next Zoom after that, there was like 30 people. Right. And then it just kind of grew as and then of course I told Pace like, hey, I really want to do this. Right. So, but I think it's really like, again, for me, it was like, I knew that this is something that I'm passionate about. And so because I care about it and I care about people, I just knew, okay, this is what I wanted to do to provide value. And I wasn't necessarily looking at the numbers. I was just going to continue just to give and give and give.
I love it. And then also because I really like getting into this and hearing people's ways of explaining it. Because I'm going to play devil's advocate. It's like, why be a giver? Like, shouldn't I want to be having things for myself shouldn't I want, if I give something, shouldn't I get something in return?
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I think if I were to compare, I think that people that tend to be more of a go-giver achieve greatness far like faster and further than people that are solely
Tit for tat.
takers. Right. Yeah, because it's like this is actually a cool example, especially because it has to do, just the word. Well, it has to do with real estate, but it's a life lesson that one of my college pastors told me. He said, you want to be able to build enough equity in relationships that when you need something, you're confident that you can go into that relationship and just say, hey, I need a favor, I need you, I need this, I need that, and you're not going to feel guilty per se, that you can kind of dip into that equity, right? I
Right.
mean, especially when we talk about equity, in real estate, it's like, hey, I bought a home, and then, now years later, it's like it grew in this much value, right? And I mean, I'm not going to do like, exact parallels, but it's like the idea of adding value and giving to people is, in some ways, it's like if we're going to kind of, use that as an analogy with real estate, it's like giving to people is adding equity in your relationship, right? So the fact that I've, led these mindset Zooms and people appreciate it, it's like, I don't even know the equity that I'm building, to be honest. But people will literally come to me. I get deals sent to me every single week. I kid you not.
How do you utilize it, right? Because I'm actually, people don't know this, but for sub two, I'm about to do a Zoom series on how to deal with agents.
I
It's
love
starting
it.
next week, and Pace hasn't announced it yet, but
Okay.
I've set up the whole syllabus for him.
That's
But
awesome.
this was something that's in my head of like, damn, I should need to ask Pace, but why don't I just ask you?
Yeah.
How do you literally just do the mindset Zooms and then people hit you up or like, I want to know you, I have a
Yeah.
deal. That's it. Like you don't even talk about deals in the mindset Zoom at all. They just naturally come to you after that.
I mean, sometimes I joke about it, like, "Hey, don't forget," and like I put
Okay.
in the subject or the title, of my name. I'll put like my name, my cell phone. I'm a buyer. I'm a mindset leader. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of just a little bit in the forefront. And I sometimes will joke and be like, "I'll drop it," but I mean, I don't. To be honest, it's not in the forefront of my mind because I'm not naturally a taker, and that's
Right.
probably my biggest issue is that I probably could capitalize a lot more than I actually am, and that's my
Right.
biggest struggle. But I'm
Right.
okay with that for now because everything has worked out well the way that it is, and I'm not in a scarcity mindset anymore.
I love it.
So yeah,
No, that's amazing. It's just I was thinking about it, like, should I even do that or should I just do the Zoom and wait for it? Because it's interesting because it's a thing, it's a balance, right? Like
yep,
I am gonna give either way. Even if I got nothing out of it, I'd be happy with it.
yeah,
But it is interesting to think about. It's like, should I try to somehow get something out of this, or should I like I don't mind I get what I do, for instance, when I go on a Zoom, it's like, hey, I'm willing to help anybody out. I might not
yeah,
answer the phone. I probably won't answer the phone, but
yeah,
if you text me, I'll eventually get back to you. And I'll be quicker than Pace or somebody who's really, really busy. Like I'll respond
right,
like within 24 hours probably to answer your question.
yeah.
Um, so I've been doing that and that works really well. That naturally leads into getting deals. So it's interesting. I just wanted your opinion on it. It sounds like people just send you stuff, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think I mean, I think in some ways, again, I didn't plan this out, right? I just
Right.
knew that there was a need, and then I stepped in, right? And to me, like because of my background and just the way that I am, like just my whole entire life, anytime I see a need, I want to fill it. And so I think that's part of like the whole kind of, I guess people call me a go-giver, but to me it's like I'm just a problem solver, which is
Right.
why I love sub 2 because that's how we're postured to think when we talk to homeowners. It's like we're trying to solve problems, right? And so I honestly feel like, you know, number one, whatever you're going to provide is definitely going to be valuable because you have a strategy that's working for you. And so many people are coming in that they just don't know what to do. And I don't know the strategy of, of agent outreach. And I've always been curious because every time I hear like a deal where there's an agent, I'm like, pass. But then you're directly dealing with agents and your strategy is working for you. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
I think it's like everyone has different strategies. And I think that our community is big enough that whatever you're going to teach, it'll be really valuable to the people that are going to be curious about it.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
So how did that even all start? Like how did you come up with the idea of the mindset zooms? Why did you feel like there was a need for it? Like where did this whole idea come from?
It came from that Zoom where Pace talked about Robert G. Allen. It literally like I wasn't actually attending a lot of the Zooms because it was just hard. I have, you know, 2 young kids and, you know, I work and stuff like that. And so I literally was like washing the dishes when I you know, popped in my headphones and was listening. And Pace, he quoted Robert G. Allen, right? That again, he said 99.9% of the times when people fail in real estate, it's not because of a lack of knowledge, it's a mindset issue. And so again, that's for me, it was like, I saw a need, right? And being that I just really enjoy solving problems, that's when I was like creating PowerPoints and talking about like mindset. I used the movie Inside Out, which is a great Pixar movie, to talk about like how we need to understand how our emotions, you know, either serve us well or don't serve us, right? And it's just like from that, I think right now in our society, like, and I'm not going to go to, you know, kind of high level on this, but it's like, I think that mental health is something that our society still struggles with,
Right.
but it's like mental health is on the rise, suicide is on the rise, right? And we're still kind of, as a society, refusing to accept that mental health and mental wellness is a part of how we function in our, you know, our like our bodies. Our body is literally connected to our emotions. Like our physical health is, and the symptoms that we have is a literal manifestation of our emotional health and our mental health. And so for me, like I think what's really interesting is that right now the trend is the word mindset, right? Is like it's an acceptable word in society. But to me, when I think of mindset, I think of mental health and mental wellness. And that's like
The
my
difference in your
wheelhouse.
mind.
I'm sorry.
What's the difference in your mind between those two?
I think mindset has a lesser stigma than mental health.
Okay.
Because mental health, people immediately think I'm not crazy. Right? They're like, I'm like, "Oh, have you ever gone to a therapist?" Like, "No." Like, "I'm not crazy." You know what I mean? Like, that's literally what some people think. They're like, "Oh, I'm," and then they're fearful of telling people. It's like, imagine this, if I'm like, "Hey, Jonah, like, I've got some mental health issues." You're like, "Ooh," you know, like,
It
you know,
sounds sadder.
right. It sounds sadder. It sounds, you know, more severe. It sounds like, "Oh, I don't know what to do with you when you talk about that." However, if I were to say, "Hey, Jonah, I've got some mindset issues." Like, "Hey, let's talk about that."
Well,
Right?
mental health issues usually are more deep. That's
It is, but I still think that like to a certain degree mindset has to do with origins of
mental health stuff.
trauma. Yeah, like trauma and just like life, you know, certain life experiences that create a certain mindset,
Right.
right? For me, like I'm really big on family systems theory. I used to be a family therapist, and so to me, I'm a firm believer that like how you were raised and like the environment that you grew up in has a lot to do with what you do now, right? In terms of your mindset, your coping skills, all that stuff. Like, and every time I speak with people and I'm like, hey, you know, like what are some of your barriers? Can you talk a little bit about, you know, your family origin story, stuff like that? And people will share it. And like and to me, I'm able to identify, oh, this is a little bit of the root cause of why you have a particular mindset issue. And then
Right.
I kind of develop a very specific game plan of like how they could work through that.
So how does one do that? How do you, because that's like a really, that takes a lot of trust, right? To like
Yeah.
get to the point where they're talking about trauma. How
Yeah.
does one do that?
How does one,
How does one get to like the issue at heart, right?
yeah.
Because there are mindset issues that are easy. Like I'll talk about mine. This is one I talk about a lot on this podcast.
Okay.
Where I mean, I already talked about it. Where it was like, and it's this one isn't like crazy deep. I feel like,
Okay.
like it's deepish, where I was talking about, like I already said, like the save your money for a rainy day, right? For the
Right.
first year of business, I didn't hire anybody because I'm like, man, I'm making 30K a month. Like if I start, I'm right now at like 5K spending. That means I get to keep 25K. But if I actually start spending 20K a month and I don't make any more money, then I'm making less money. But obviously now I spend 20K a month and I make like 60K a month in
Ooh,
revenue,
that's
right?
amazing.
Right. Thank you. But like that's not the point. The point being that like this mindset belief was limiting me from taking the action that was necessary, being like,
Right.
stop, spend more money, you're ready for it. The universe has gifted you to being
Yes.
at that point where you can spend 20K a month on whatever you need to spend it on. And you deserve the more revenue that comes with it.
Right.
I guess, like, how do you get someone to realize what is holding them back? That's my question. Like, how would you
I'm
get someone, like, that's hard, and I don't know if you have an
yeah.
answer. Like,
Yeah, no, I do actually. I I'll give you an example and I won't name the person, but there was this one student and he was like, he had hired a VA and then he was like, "Oh, I need to let my VA go. Like I'm just going to kind of slow down in my real estate pursuits. Like I just don't feel like I'm able to be consistent enough." And I had seen him come to my mindset Zooms before, but he never really spoke up. It's hard to kind of like reveal your mindset issues, right? Especially
right,
because we're in like a money making business, mentorship, right? So I had noticed him and he made that post and I thought, oh gosh, like I need to reach out to this student, right? And when I finally did, we just talked about it. It was like, and he was like, I'm not able to be consistent. Like I've got a W-2. My W-2 schedule is really it's really, it's hard to predict his W-2 schedule. And he's like, I'm just not really able to be consistent. I'm like, okay, like I'll table that for now, right? Because that's what he thought was his struggle. And then I'm like, okay, well, tell me like what do you do? Right. And he's like a manager and he's been successful, like, in his actual career. And I'm like, okay, like, and so I'm like able to see some superpowers, if you will, just skill sets, abilities, right? That some people they're just like they don't carry those into real estate. They're just like, I don't know what I have. I don't know what I'm good at, right? So I asked him like, okay, what do you do? Like, oh, this everything points to him being a very successful, professional in his own business. So it's like, okay, take a step back. I'm like, tell me about your family. And he's like, oh, well, my family had, I had a great upbringing. Siblings and my parents are still together. They're married. I'm like, okay. Like, and then I'm like, tell me just about what it was like growing up in your home. Right. Because he was kind of painting this like, and in my mind, I literally thought, oh shoot, like I got nothing. But I asked, I dig, right? And I'm not, again, with my background, I'm not fearful of like digging, right? Because I know that I can find something. And so I
we're
asked
all
him, I
hooked
said,
up
well, tell
somehow. So there's something there somewhere.
right, right. So it's just, I think, again, with my background as being like a social worker and therapist, like the skill set that I have is I'm not fearful, and I think that I'm good at asking good questions, right? I mean,
Mhm.
especially, you've been doing the podcast, right? You have to your ability as a host is to listen and then also to like ask follow-up questions, right? So that's essentially what, I mean, therapists kind of do. So
I
I
try to, I say my superpower is asking really good questions too.
yeah.
Knowing you're probably better than me at it, so I'm listening really intently. I want to
No,
know
it's just it's just different though, but I think you do have the ability. It requires you to listen, right? And then to ask good follow-up questions, right? You're just like, because you're wanting to understand more. When someone says something, it's like, wait a minute, let me understand a little bit more deeply what you mean by that, right? So that's like you're excellent at asking good questions. So with this particular student, it was like, oh, my parents are still married, and like they seem to have a good marriage. But he said a couple of things that kind of triggered like a flag. I'm like, well, tell me a little bit more about your parents. Like, how is it being raised by your parents? And so I don't want to go too much into it, but basically, this student, what he shared of his experience, what I was able to uncover was that um, his mother brought him to the hospital, um, like just she was kind of, what we call like a Munchausen's by proxy. She always thought that her son was sick, right? And it was like, and he said that she did that ever since he was like 6 months old, right? And so imagine anyone growing up in an environment where your parent, your mother, right, a mother who's supposed to be like a nurturing caregiver in your life, thought that you were sick all the time. And it was like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? So as an adult now, right, like, and I was able to kind of connect some dots for him, and it was a really powerful and really emotional one-on-one. And it was just like, he never thought that he was good enough. Right? That's a huge mindset to have, a mindset struggle to have, not feeling good enough, right? Not feeling good enough to, like, make your parents proud, right? And then the student was on vacation with his family, and his wife chimed in, and she said he even would do his homework in middle school but never turn it in. And it was like, because he had a mindset issue of never feeling like he was good enough. So he would read, he's like, I know how to do it, but I don't want to fail because I feel like I'm just not good enough. Right. So then people give up. Right. So it was like, so for me, it was like, wow, like, I think that this is really like a huge boulder for you. And it was really emotional. It was like, he was crying kind of out of like maybe a little bit of relief, to be honest, too. And like, I was kind of speaking almost, on behalf of his mother, who maybe will never say this to him. And I said, and I called him by his first name, and I said, like, you are a good son, and I'm proud of you for what you've accomplished, and it was just like, it was emotional, right? But it's like, sometimes people never have the opportunity to like just talk to people about this. And I mean, truly, like, being in sub 2, I can't tell you how many times people have said, I've never told anyone this, but ... And I'm like, I'm not scared, right? Because I'm just like, all right, like, let's go, right? Because I know that this is my superpower. And I'm like, let's go. I'm ready to like help you. I'm ready to support you. I'm ready to encourage you. Like, I just get super excited to help people.
Amazing. I mean, like, that was a really cool story, and that taught me a lot. And it's something I might start doing on the podcast and really start to get people out of their shell. Is be like, because that's so interesting, and like such an interesting perspective of being like, you're 100% right. It's not only identifying what the fear is, but to do that, you have to go way back into their path of the childhood and like the child that's in there in order to understand, like, okay, what were the mindset issues that you had as a kid, that what you were taught, and then only then you can start dealing with it. So that's amazing. So I want to write it down. Or I'm going to think about it, is the questions you kind of start with is like, what was your family like? I don't know. What were the other question? Like, what's your family like?
Can you name any traumas that you've had in your life?
You just straight up
especially as like and especially I like to go back as a kid, because we develop a lot, right? We develop a lot of our habits and certain things from our childhood. Right. And I, like, one of my mindset Zooms, I talked about like attachment theory and how the way that your parents raised you and their ability to be present and how they nurtured you, how they how did they model, right? Because things are more caught than they are taught, meaning we behave by how people behave rather than how they tell us to behave, right? So parents parents can be like, oh, you should do this, but if they're doing the opposite, what are you going to be more inclined to do?
Say that one more time. I want that to sink
in. So in life, it's like more is caught than it is taught.
Okay.
Meaning how you model and live your life, like through your actions, is more powerful than the words that you're going to say to people.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that. So how about for you? Like what were some traumas that you had as a kid that you think directly affected your
Excuse
business,
me.
like at the beginning?
I think for me, and now you're practicing. You're like, let's go. All right, I love it. I think so. For me, like my traumas that I've created into a superpower, excuse me, is so like just I think I'll kind of go a little bit general. But my parents they dated for a week, then got engaged and married soon after that. They didn't really know each other.
Were they immigrants? Like what? How did that
Yeah,
happen?
they're immigrants. Yeah, they
Okay.
was like it was kind of like they were set up by family and family friends and whatnot.
Okay.
And so um they got married and but really it's like they got married and had kids super quick. And so they didn't really know each other. And so really my personal trauma from my family was they fought a lot. Like there was not a day I think that went by. And I have to always preface it by saying I'm really close with my parents. I love them. However, they have their own stuff, right? They have their own issues. And so there was never really a day that went by that they didn't fight. I woke up to like screaming and like doors slamming, all this stuff. And so from a really early age, probably like even 4 years old, I was kind of like a mini social worker. I was like, like mini social worker, mini like marriage counselor, just helping my parents. And I was like, oh, like don't yell, kind of just stepped in. And so um for me, like one of my mindset issues, my father would tell me all the time, like when I was young, he would say, you're too sensitive.
Hmm.
And so I always thought that that was a weakness, right? Like the fact that I would cry easily or, all that stuff. And I always thought that that was a weakness. And it wasn't until after college, and I was working for a church at the time, and one of the pastors, her name is April Diaz, and I was talking about just like my family origins and a little bit of that story. And I told her that my dad told me that I was too sensitive. And she said, I could just remember this day so clearly. She said, have you ever thought about your sensitivity as being one of your strengths, that you have an ability to be empathetic? And for me, it was like, I never turned back. I never thought that it was a weakness
Right.
ever since that day. And that was like in my early 20s. And so for me, it was like, I've really come to realize that pain of like just what I went through with my parents and helping them. And again, the fact that I still have a really close relationship with them and love them. But it was like that pain of what I went through with my family, it turned into a superpower because I can empathize with people. Like when they have like parental issues, like mommy issues, daddy issues, like relationship issues. I'm really passionate about relationships. And so it's like, for me, I realized like this is a superpower because I could be empathetic, right? And I could feel, I'm like, oh yeah, like I've experienced something like that. I feel you, right? When people say like, I feel you, it's like, do you really? Right? Like, what have you gone through? What have you
Right.
gone through
The funny thing
that
is I actually do feel you because my parents were divorced and argued a lot. So like
mm,
a lot of that story was similar to mine. I don't think
yeah,
my parents ever said I was too sensitive, but there was a lot of trauma in the sense of um, constant arguing, trying to get them to stop talking to each other, basically, or like stop
right.
arguing. It's why I'm kind of realizing we're very similar people in the sense of like I've
Mhm.
always thought I could be a therapist if I in a different life in the
Yeah.
sense of like listening to people and asking questions. So,
Yeah.
anywho, but
But you're kind of doing that. So I don't want to shortchange the fact that your podcast and your desire to talk about fears is your platform of being, your own, a therapist in your own right, right? You're
yeah,
helping people to acknowledge fears. You're helping people to like just talk about it. And people that resonate with the people that you have on, right? That's like it's therapeutic. It's like, oh wow, like I went through something like that. And maybe it's like, I mean, I'll like if you want to reach out to me, I definitely, reach me out on my Instagram or whatever, right? But it's like if things resonate with you, like I love helping people
right.
through stuff like that. So you are in your own right providing a therapeutic and healing platform.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that like you
Appreciate
don't
that.
shortchange. Yeah, yeah,
No, I
absolutely.
appreciate it. So how did that so you figured that out through
Yeah.
the pastor, and then did that eventually affect your real estate business? I'm curious if any of it ever affected your real estate business, or like you were talking a bit about the saving money thing, like in the same,
Yeah.
like not spending money. Do you think that was the main one?
The money was the main one. I think that for me, the other thing is when people talk about like, I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z. I don't know how to become a successful real estate investor, for example, when I stepped into sub two. But it's like, so
Nobody did.
my right. I mean, it's like,
No.
but it's a lot, but a lot of people are like, it's so we all enter with like varying levels of experience, right? Um, but I think I'm trying to kind of figure out if I can answer your question of like how that lent into just my success in real estate. It's that's a really good question. I don't know if I have an
You need more
answer for
time to
that.
think about it. Well, I mean, I can
Yeah.
tell you how it led to your success for sure. I mean, literally everything we're talking about. Since you knew your sensitivity was a strength, you've been using it by creating
Right.
mindset. You've
Right.
been using it your entire life. You became a therapist and social worker off of it.
Right. Right.
So I mean, it's your obvious that you turned into a superpower, and it is a superpower.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's how it definitely led to your success. I was just curious if there are any others, but I find it super interesting. I like that. I might start throwing that in there. I might be like, I might throw people off, but I feel like weirdly people will still answer it. It's one of the
Yeah.
it's like a seller call. You're kind of
Yeah.
nervous to ask that question, but you realize like it's not as bad as you think it is.
Yeah.
Like there are a
Yeah.
lot of
There's
questions in seller calls where it's like, should I really ask that? How will they react?
yeah.
I didn't even think about that though.
I mean, like I was doing a little bit of coaching with seller calls. Like I again, like I don't, to be honest, I've never really called a seller. I've called a couple of sellers before, just like because people have reached out and said like, oh, can you help them with this particular thing, right?
Right.
So I'm like, I'm not. I call people. I call my patients. Like that's what I do for a living, and
Right.
I dig into their, in their pain, right? So, but I think that with seller calls, when I was coaching, right, about just kind of like the sales experience, if you will, of talking to to people, to homeowners, is it's like they have a question, like, so even take yours for example. It's like they said something that raised a question mark for you, right? And it's like, ooh, that might be like a door to their pain, right? And so it's like a lot of people, they're like, they're fearful of digging into that, right? And so, I mean, there's an author that I love. Her name is Brene Brown, and one of her books that she wrote called Daring Greatly, she talks about how society lacks an ability to want to be empathetic and step into people's pain with them.
Hmm.
So it's a lot of times it's like, and the whole idea of like not wanting to ask the question. It's like I don't want to bother, right? Like if you want to talk about mindset stuff, it's like I don't want to bother them. I don't want to offend them. It might be too personal to act like you're trying to buy their home. Like
Right.
how personal, right, is something like that, right? So it's like,
Pretty personal.
and at the end of the day, right, is like if we're kind of a unique and we're in a unique position in that we are real estate investors that want to help people, right? So when you're talking to a seller and they give you kind of like, a breadcrumb, like you have to take that, right? And at the end of the day, the mindset shift to have is I need to ask them about that potential pain because it might lead me to help provide a solution for them,
Right.
right? But see, again, I think kind of like what I was talking about earlier of like people have these fears and they immediately look at the fear as worst case scenario, right? And I'm like, well, did you ever explore best case scenario? If you were to ask that and they were open to answering, that could lead you to solving their problem, right? And how much greater is that reward, right? But it's like, so don't get stuck on the I'm too scared to ask that question because to me, I always preface it, right? You can do disclaimers, you can do just little like, hey, I always preface it with like, hey, forgive me if this is too much of a personal question.
Right.
But when you said this, I'm curious, like, is there anything else going on, right? For example. right? And they're like, oh yeah, well, blah 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 and blah blah blah, and like they're just and then they just spill,
Right.
and they share, right? But it's like if you stood there and you're like, they said something, and I'm too scared to like ask them, and
Right.
I'm just gonna keep the door closed and be like, okay, thanks anyway. I'm like, ugh, you know,
Right.
yeah. I always encourage people, especially when it comes to like seller calls, is like have the perspective and have the mindset that you're there to help. And if
Right.
people get offended by that, just by you asking a question because you want to help, that's not your issue, it's their issue.
Ooh, I love that.
Right? Like Pace always talks. I mean, I had a conversation with Pace about that, and it's like, it's not your issue. Like if they're really like offended, it's like they need to take a deeper look into
Right.
that. Right? Why is that an offensive question? Right? And it's like, oh, well, it's too personal. Well, if they want to help you, then wouldn't it be helpful for them to know? Right? And it's like people want help, but they're not willing to do the hard work. And sometimes doing the hard work is just really revealing where you're at, right? Especially, when we talk about like, pre-foreclosures, like people have the ostrich syndrome where they're just like dig their head in the sand and they want to ignore it. But like everything is always a timing issue too. You never know that your phone call with them might be the perfect timing to where you could ask that question and they're ready.
Right.
I always say that too.
Yeah. No, I get it for sure. So, what would you say to somebody who wants to be a good questioner? What do you think is like the number one skill or that somebody should develop?
Yeah.
Or like how do you really become a good questioner? Because I think
I would,
it's
yeah.
underrated
Yeah.
how much like being able to ask the right questions can get you.
Yeah. I would love to answer that, but I would also love to hear your answers because again, I feel like you
You've heard
have
since this is my podcast.
what yeah. But again, right? It's like, I'm curious, right? Because so I think for me, first and foremost, it's being a good listener. And I think one of the greatest challenges, if we're gonna even just say like, let's just talk about like seller calls, right? And like and trying to harness the ability to ask good questions. You have to listen without having an agenda. Because
Mhm.
if you have an agenda, you're trying to kind of like check boxes or fill in blanks. And
Right.
everything else that they share, if it's not filling in those blanks or checking those boxes off for you, you're going to miss a lot of nuggets, a lot of breadcrumbs, right? And so to me, I think that's always the first and foremost thing is like I actually want to develop a sales training
Mm.
eventually. And where it just solely targets helping people build rapport. Because again, I think that it's underrated, right? Just the ability to ask good questions. So, first and foremost, you have to listen intently and listen like you care. I always say, before you step into that call, imagine that you're calling, a friend, right? Or a family member that you care about, right? It's like you have to lead with that care and that compassion. If you don't have that, like that really truly separates, I think, people that are like good salespeople versus not. Like, if we're going to talk about Pace, right? I think Pace truly cares about people. He's also a super smart and savvy business person, but it's like he's figured out how to do both, help
Right.
people and make money, right? And so but he also like gives more than he takes and provides a lot of value. And so but I think that, again, going back to your question, it's listen first and listen
Right.
without an agenda.
Right.
And then it's like, and I used to kind of, during the daily DAOs, which is like kind of a sales training in sub two, it's like I used to do a training with Ty Leon Guerrero. And one of the things I used to say is like when I would kind of give feedback is there's some people when they're practicing their seller calls, it's like they ask a question and then they ask another question, or they ask like three questions all at once. And it's like, if you imagine, like, I love ping pong. I don't know, I'm Chinese, whatever, right? Like when you play ping pong, like you want to be able to volley, you want to be able to hit back and forth. And it's like, to
Right.
me, it's the art of a conversation. And if I could ever write a book, it would be like, that would be like a chapter or a book in and of itself, is like the art of a conversation.
I like
Right.
it.
But it requires listening, and it requires like, if you need to like grab a pen and paper when you're talking to someone, or like make mental notes. Right. And like, and in some ways maybe too, like, don't be afraid to like not interrupt them, but don't be afraid to like ask a follow-up question on something that they said. Right. You did that earlier, like, oh, you said this, like, tell me a little bit more about that. Right.
Right.
So that tell me a little bit more, asking open-ended questions serves people better than asking yes or no questions.
Right.
Right. Because you don't. Yeah.
I agree. Like, I'm just saying, like, it's funny because like when I was thinking of my answer, it's very close to what you were saying.
Okay.
My initial response to my head was like, "Are you genuinely actually do you genuinely actually want to know the answer?
Right.
Of, like, whatever you're asking, like, or
Right.
are you genuinely curious about this person and want to
Right.
know, like, is this actually, like, do you actually care?
Yeah.
Like, what, like, how are you dealing with the foreclosure? Like, what are
Yeah.
you doing right now? Or
Yeah.
are you saying that because you want the sale?
Right.
Right? Like, I 100% agree in the sense that, especially with seller calls, it's like, I'm not trying to, I am trying to buy your house, but more so I'm trying to give you the options because you told
Yeah.
me you want to sell your house.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you every single option possible, and then you tell me which one we go down, and then we just go from
Right.
there.
Right.
And you just tell me what you want.
Yeah.
So I agree 100%. And I was thinking about it with like these interviews too, like in the sense of like, it's what I try to do. Like, I'll tell you my process so far that I've been doing is that what I try to do is I try to ask an open-ended question like that, and then I'll pick out a part where I'm like, I think that could be good for the audience. Like, tell me more about that
Yep.
specific part.
Right.
If there is a part in it. I try to
Right.
do that because like I'll be listening to what you're saying and being like you're right, mental notes in my head of like, where should I ask next to
Right.
like go delve this into an area where we should start talking more, whether like related to mindset or whatever it might be.
Right. Right.
So yeah, no, I mean, it's a very similar answer. It seems like it's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I just to piggyback off that real quick too, I think like, so you talked about how like one of the first things is really, as much as possible, like, lead with care. Like, you want to be able to make the other person know that you genuinely care, right? And that could
yeah,
look really different, right? And it's like, but every person that you're connecting with connects differently, right? And so it's like, like, again, like, I'll talk about Pace. Like, he has a great ability to like to assess a person and to like try to figure out like what vibes with them to connect, right? So it's like, if a seller has a strong personality, he's not afraid to kind of like match their energy. If someone has like a little bit of more of like a meek personality, right, he's going to be more gentle with them, right? So it's like, I think part of that too is like having the ability to kind of like
read the other person.
morph, yeah, read the other person for sure, assess, and also kind of morph into what you think they might need, and then
Right.
just readjust accordingly, right? So for me, like, right off the bat, like, with seller calls, for example, like, um if it's like, oh, if you're calling someone like, oh, hey, how's it going, blah blah blah, and they're like, ah, I'm okay, right? Like, a lot of people will be like,
Immediately, I'm
great.
like, something's wrong there.
Exactly, exactly. But I kid you not, like, I've heard VA calls because I would also do like seller feedback, right? And like, people would send me recordings. I'm like, oh, like, here is an opportunity that you missed, right? So I literally heard a VA call where it's like, oh, hi, Mr. Smith, and like, how are you doing? Like, oh, I'm not that great. Like, my wife just died, and literally the VA said, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that, sir. When are you looking to sell your home? I'm like, right, like, like, no, that's
Yeah,
not what you should
you
do,
obviously don't
right?
give a shit.
Right. And so it's like, yeah, you have the end game, like, that's what your goal is, right? If you want, but it's like, you're not leading with value. You're not leading with care and compassion, right? So it's like, for me, I'm really big on like what I loved teaching people to do is like pick up on just like the little nuances. Like, if someone were to say, I'm just doing okay, I'm like,
It means you're not doing okay. It means
right,
something's wrong.
exactly. Right. And so literally I'll say, how come you're doing just okay and not doing great, not doing super well, not like love and life, right? And it's like, but it's like, and then they can answer like, oh, I don't know, whatever. And I'm like, no, like I'm genuinely am curious and I care, right? And it's like just staying in that, right? Because people assume immediately, like when you, especially when you walk by people or whatever, right? Or even just like see people you haven't seen in a while. Hey, how's it going? Right? The first thing that most people are going to say is, I'm great, or like whatever. It's like, oh, I'm doing great, right? But it's like stuff really might be going on.
Right. That's just hiding at one, but like you wouldn't necessarily. They might be doing fine. You never know.
Right.
That
Exactly.
point, you'd have to keep asking questions.
Exactly.
I like it.
Yeah.
Man, well, I want you to write that book. Personally, I feel like you writing that book would be pretty awesome. I learned a lot there. I like the going back into trauma and not being afraid of it. That's something I've noticed you talking right now is I've noticed I've been afraid of asking that on a public podcast. Like I've been like, would they feel like they'd be put on blast if I did that? Or like, would they feel uncomfortable answering that question?
Right.
I feel like more I think about it is like, I don't know if they would or wouldn't. I think it depends. I think
it depends.
It depends on how bad it was. I feel like.
Yeah. It depends on so many different things. I think like, so Marlon Johnson and I are actually going to be doing a podcast together, and it's going to be, I think that it's going to be called Redemption Stories, but it's going to be talking about how people turn their pain into a superpower.
I love that.
And it's like, but the other thing that I wanted to like kind of add into our podcast is some people don't know their superpower. So I'm like, come on our podcast so that we can talk about it. And I'm going to go there. I'm going to go into the pain, and because you can't heal from pain, and you can't utilize your superpower if you don't heal from it.
Right.
And I think that that's a huge prerequisite of like utilizing your superpower. And so talking about it and recognizing, right, it's not about being a victim, because some people are like, what's the point about talking about, my trauma? It's like, well, like, it hasn't served you with the mentality that you've had about it, so let's go the opposite direction that you've been avoiding this whole time.
Right.
And it's helped people. So I kind of just frame it in a way where it's like, do you want to level up? Do you want to achieve everything that you dream of? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, let's go.
I love that.
So,
let's figure it out. I love it.
Exactly.
I might end it there. I mean, usually I go an hour and we're already over. So I like ending it right there with like, hey, do you want to level it up or what, guys? So you guys are trying to level it up. Hit up.
Hit me up
at Elena_method. That's your Instagram.
Instagram, yeah.
Am I following you? I don't know if I'm following you, Elena.
I'm following you, man.
If I'm not following you, I feel bad.
It's okay. You tagged me, so I feel like you are. I don't know. It's okay.
No, I am, because I tagged you. I am following
you. Yeah. I'm like
Elena Method.
Yeah. I changed it. So
yeah. Okay. Cool. So is that the best way to reach you? Instagram?
Yep.
100%. Cool.
Yeah.
I love it. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Jonah. This was really fun.
And then what do you want? What do you need out of the universe right now? What do people give you if they hit you?
My biggest need, if I were to be able to ask for it, which I am, is I need more long-term private money lenders.
Okay.
Yeah. We have so many deals that we get presented to us every week, and I'm literally turning down deals because I just don't have enough long-term private money lenders.
Okay. Well, we're going to work on that. This is from Jonathan Gonzalez. I think he's talking about your podcast. So like how much in the planning is that done?
So if you follow myself and then Marlon Johnson, I don't know his exact handle on Instagram. I can find it out.
No, they're following you. We're not.
Okay.
I refuse to highlight Marlon. No, I'm just kidding. I love him, but like this is your podcast. They're gonna follow you.
Yeah. So it's going to be our podcast, me and Marlon Johnson's, but you can follow my Instagram, and it's going to be every Friday around 3 p.m. Pacific time.
I love it. You're literally doing it at the exact same time I'm doing my agent Zooms. So you're killing me.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. We'll just have to go. No, I
But
mean,
again, it's one of those.
eventually,
There's a lot of value just going around, right? So
yeah,
it's
I
like
mean, there's
people just
eventually a point where it's just like there's gonna be something happening always at some
all
point
the time.
anyway. So it's just like
Yeah,
it just is what it is. What do you need right now, right?
right,
And your
right.
podcast is gonna go a lot longer than my Zoom series, so it's just is what it is. Like
Yeah.
they should listen to yours. I
Hey,
100%
but
want you guys to
go shout
listen.
out, go follow Jonah's Zooms too if you want to do agent
Yeah, but
outreach.
that's only sub 2 anyway. So
Okay.
everybody should be doing Elena's stuff. Is it Elena? It's Elena, right?
Elena.
Elena. I
Yeah.
hate names like yours where it's like
Could go a few
Elena,
different ways. Yeah.
Elena,
Yeah.
Elena. You're
Yeah.
kidding me.
It's okay. Elena. It's
Elena,
all good. Yeah.
Elena. Anywho, all right. So Elena, I'm gonna end it there.
Yeah.
You're amazing. You
Thank
don't
you.
have to go off immediately. We can talk for a sec also after the podcast. Everyone always leaves. I'm just ending the podcast
Oh,
because
sure.
it's time to end it.
All good.
That is Skorch the Fears episode 31. Ladies and gentlemen, we freaking killed it. That was one of my favorites. That taught me a lot about asking good questions. What I love about this is I also always learn something new, which is cool. And this is I'm gonna get into it. I'm gonna just start asking people about their traumas right out of the gate. First question. What's your family trauma, man? Like we want to get real in deep right now.
Do it. And if they're unaware, like just point them my way.
Yeah. Man, I might do that. Daryl Ellison is on next. I might just start it off, like get real freaking deep.
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm ending it. Skorch the Fears, episode 31. We are out. I will see y'all next week. Episode 32 with Daryl Ellison. He's a beast. He's freaking killing it. Just wholesaling, creative financing, genius. He's amazing. You guys are going to love him. 5 p.m. PST, Thursday next week. Let's